Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Tonight, as we approach yet another international crisis created by Vladimir Putin, we are joined by Evelyn Farkas, a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund and a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. She is an MSNBC national security analyst. Evelyn, troops forming on a Russian border area with Georgia. We've seen this before.
Right. This is Vladimir Putin showing the world and showing his neighbors in particular that he's still the man, if you will, that Russia's still a great power and that Russia has a lot of cards. It's also, I think, a little bit of a finger in the face to the West, so Western Europe, the G7, our president, saying, hey, I can still cause a lot of trouble. Don't think about expanding NATO. Georgia's still on the list. They still want to become a NATO member. And the original invasion of Georgia, if you remember, in 2008, came about because the Georgians were offered a conditional membership by NATO. And actually, George Bush, our president at the time, was pushing it really hard. It was Georgia and Ukraine. It didn't come to pass because the Russians invaded, and they continue to occupy 20% of Georgia's territory. But this is a very dangerous situation, and unfortunately, it's yet again, I would say, a G7 failure, because they should have been talking about Ukraine and Georgia and all of the things that Russia's doing wrong, rather than even having to discuss the possibility of re-inviting Russia into the G7.
Yeah, President Trump had them basically wasting their time on a discussion. And then Vladimir Putin, to show his gratitude for how hard Donald Trump worked for him at the G7 trying to get him back in the group, he does this. You mentioned the first incursion into Georgia. Let's listen to what Republican presidential candidate John McCain had to say about that then, and just imagine what has happened to Republicanism since John McCain said this and where Donald Trump is now. Let's listen to this.
I know from speaking this morning to the president of Georgia, Misha Saakashvili, who I have known for many years, that he knows that the thoughts and the prayers and support of the American people are with that brave little nation as they struggle today for their freedom and independence. I know I speak for every American when I say to him, today we are all Georgians.
It's so hard to watch that with John McCain gone and Donald Trump now in the place where John McCain wanted to be. That didn't have to be written for him. Not one word of that had to be put in his mind for that. He was ready for that kind of, how to deal with that kind of crisis. What should this president be doing now?
Well, he should be ideally doing what John McCain is doing. This is not a democracy. This is a country that's trying to reestablish a sphere of influence. It's trying to bully Georgia, of course. There's also the situation in Ukraine, which we need to keep a very close eye on. Now, maybe they've made some progress, but nevertheless, I mean, Vladimir Putin's agenda is all about creating a sphere of influence, getting his way with the neighboring countries, weakening them politically. And so this is again, unfortunately, John McCain understood we have to fight against the bullies. We have to fight against autocracy. The Georgians established a democracy. It was a really big deal. And John McCain was actually there at the very beginning, heavily involved when most people didn't know there was a Republic of Georgia. We just thought there was the state of Georgia. And so he understood clearly what happened. In 2008, when we said, Georgia, come into NATO, we didn't realize that the Russians would have the reaction that they would have. Now we know that they'll use military force to prevent sovereign countries from joining associations that their people want them to join. That should be unacceptable. So the West needs to jump in right now, Lawrence. I mean, our government should be leading the way to put an end to this aggression.
It is Labor Day, Monday, the 2nd of September of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. That's right, folks. It's a holiday weekend, and it's been a busy one at that. Hurricanes galore, mass shootings everywhere, and so the supposed President of the United States is not attending to any of those issues, but he has a lot of grievances this morning. Apparently, Paul Krugman is a traitor. Anybody who criticizes Trump is a traitor, so that when he gets proved to be a treasonous person, everybody will say, "Oh, well, that's an overused word," because Trump uses it all the time, and therefore we can't actually show that he's a traitor, say that he's a traitor, because, that term has just been, used too much now, isn't it? Everybody uses it. Everybody just throws it. Oh, they're just calling me a traitor because they want to shut me up. Yeah. You know, how calling someone racist is one of those political correct terms that the liberals use. Well, that's the least of our problems. Dorian is cycling right now and hammering the Bahamas still. Cat 6 is what I've been hearing. Not on the Bahamas specifically, but there's been speculation. Now, remember, the graduation of these storms only go up to a 5. So don't call it climate change. All right? Can't be that. It's just one of those things. Okay, well, there's all sorts of solutions. I heard someone who, ostensibly the FEMA director, but I don't believe it is. But regardless, this sentiment is really quite amazing. Apparently, now, according to the MAGA hatters, hurricanes are caused because of warm weather and warm water. Well, we have a Navy. Why not just bring in some ice and cool down the ocean? That's how they think. And then this personage began speaking about the winds, and then speculated or suggested, well, we have an Air Force. Why don't we fly those airplanes and fly in a counterclockwise or counter to the cycle or circle of the hurricane and slow it down that way. All right. Obviously, someone's been watching a little bit too much Saturday morning cartoons because no one reads a comic book anymore. Well, maybe some do, but I don't think this type of personage would. But a Saturday morning cartoon show would be right up their league. Indeed. Well, we have that going for us. The know-nothings know everything, and the actual experts have been brainwashed. Okay. Oh, which reminds me, a bunch of us came up with what we are surmising is some sort of weird troll, maybe Russian. Certainly not a MAGA-hatted dimwit, because this person knew how to spell and was using words that Americans normally don't use, especially dimwit Trump bros and gals. This troll purported to be a woman and hit on all of the familiar themes. Obama was the real racist. Name one thing that Trump did that was racist. So you bring up the birther thing and they say, that's not racist. That's pointing out the fact that Obama lied. Oh, really now? And, how Trump is just trying to make the lives of all Americans better. Yeah. All Americans? You mean like deporting ones who have schizophrenia and diabetes, who have lived here since they were a month old, came here from Iraq because of Saddam and they were part of the freedom fighters there, and then they send this guy back and he dies? Well, at least he gets to come back to America. See, Trump just wanted to make the lives of all Americans better. But Americans are only Americans if they're white. This administration wants to take sick people who were asked to come here, be part of medical research, who are in the annals of medical history and the books. And Stephen Miller and Trump put their little racist heads together and said, hey, these people are living off the fat of the lamb. Sick people? We don't need any more sick people. This goes back to this attitude from, when Trump talks about making America great again and now keep America great, whatever that means. They want to go back to the time when people who had epilepsy were considered insane. When people who had polio were obviously touched by the devil, that's why they are made to suffer. And then it is our job to make them suffer more then, isn't it? That's what he wants to go back to. The people living in wheelchairs he doesn't believe should have ever been allowed to live in the first place. Trust me. We're going to be debating whether eugenics should be an American policy again. In 5, 4, 3, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy this fine Labor Day? Well, at the top, that was a discussion, obviously, about Vlad wanting to take over the country of Georgia. And, well, I don't know, take over, but certainly any kind of entreaties about joining NATO is going to result in a military response, which is what NATO's there for, to rebuff those Vlad-inspired military responses. So there's that. Oh, and Pompeo is off to Brussels right now. Told the press, this is an aside, I'm sorry, told the press they have to take commercial because all the meetings are closed. To American press, but apparently not to the other world press, because they're all there waiting. I guess open government is closed. I guess. What's on the rest of the menu? Well, the corrupt DEA agent who tried to set up rapper Scarface finally faces justice. We'll see how much justice he actually gets, but he's finally facing it. Homeland Security is set to block Congress from detention center visits after elected officials reported mass abuses. Ha! Sounds like the Gestapo to me, but some people call me a little hyperbolic when I say that. Really? We'll see about that. History will always tell. And the Trump administration wants to take DNA at the border to try to prove families are fake. Well, it goes along with his meme that all these people seeking asylum are all scammers because Trump is a scammer. And everybody he deals with are scammers, so he thinks the whole world is scamming because that's his whole world. Normally, we keep those people, at the margins. Now he's the leader of the free world. After the break, we then move to the chef's table where North Korea, insisting the $2 billion it raised through sophisticated cyber attacks on banks and other financial institutions, is fake news. Well, that just proves that they did it. Once they start saying, oh, that's fake news, that means they did it. And Trump blocking aid to Ukraine is absolutely a gift to Putin. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice to the rightish of the page, right there by the social media scroll, is our chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the page from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is our link to our Patreon site. And do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. Though the bulk of how we keep this Resistance Radio resisting comes out of our own pockets and wallets, we would be unable to do this without you, because you are truly our biggest contributor. Truly. And your generosity over these many 8 years. 24/7, 365 Resistance Radio has allowed us to resist 24/7, 365 for over 8 years now. And we are certainly very thankful for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Thank you, Tom. He takes care of that. I take care of at Justice Putnam, because who else would? And would I want them to? And I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime, and then get that linked up on social medias, because the show notes and links diary is an integral part to this show. It is. So check it out. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West, and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, iHeart, YouTube, and wherever podcasts can be found. Okay. Well, yesterday, Sunday, Denise Oliver Velez did her regular stint on the front page at Daily Co's, and it being Labor Day weekend, and she being an editor also of Black Co's, in which I am the poetry editor of course, she has a diaspora-centric approach to her scholarship. So she posted a diary about remembering the black union worker this Labor Day. Now, of course, we must remember there wasn't always black union workers. They were kept from becoming union workers by white union workers for a very long time. Very long. And so I posted this, as I normally do, over my various Twitter or various social media platforms, one being Facebook. Now, of course, as families are, they're not all, of one political persuasion, especially an extended family. And I'm not exempt from any of that, unfortunately. There are some people that I consider to be terribly unenlightened, though they will go to great pains and, shall we say, I don't know, some sort of confidence that doesn't really get backed up by substance. Let's just put it nicely that way. That's kind of speaking around the subject. But they'll let you know how much they know and how little you know, in spite of whether you have an education. And all of that is just a piece of paper. But their self-education is much more precedent and is much more serious and much more comprehensive than any kind of brainwashing that you might have gotten at school, especially a university. And if you're a university professor, that's the worst to a know-nothing. A university professor to a know-nothing is the epitome of those people who think they know it all. When the know-nothing is really who knows it all, just ask them. They'll tell you. and in spite of all the evidence to the contrary. So, of course, I have some family members that don't necessarily have an enlightened view on race. Let's put it that way. So I posted Denise's diary, the link to it on my Facebook page. And I had a extended family member say, it's racist to just talk about the blacks. All workers. You got to do all workers. It's like White Lives Matter argument. All right. By speaking about one particular race or racial group in the context of a historical event is giving too much credence or too much emphasis upon that group at the expense of all others. So therefore, that's racist. Of course, when has the white union worker ever been forgotten in the history of Labor Day? Please. It's like the black cowboy. How many people even know that the term cowboy came because of black cowboys? And trust me, the reason they're called cowboys is because no white man would ever allow themselves to be called boy. It's a whole history of the black cowboy, which I should, as another aside, my dad taught. If it wasn't part of the established curriculum, he made sure it was. Of course, being a college professor of some note, he was given the latitude in which to do that. But starting off, there was a lot of discouragement in teaching about the black cowboy. So if my dad taught about the black cowboy, does that make him a racist? Probably does. Because it doesn't include the white cowboy also. Oh, you're just talking about the black cowboy. There's white cowboys. White cowboy lives matter. But I don't know. Should I be embarrassed for my family member? I'm certainly not embarrassed for myself because, family is what it is. But the transparent bigotry and racism is lost on these people who say that they have so much self-awareness. Oh, I studied spiritual things. I know all about philosophy. Wittgenstein is my favorite. Jesus Christ. Do you know anything about Hume, Berkeley, and Kant? No. But they know everything about Wittgenstein. All right. Well, so that was somewhat of a downer for the weekend. Because all that Denise was doing was presenting some scholarship, and she's being called a racist by one of my family members. Let's just say, I don't take kindly to that. In fact, it kind of bugged me. It did. Yeah, probably more so than the Russian troll on the Facebook page out here in Southern Oregon, who, I don't know, they're active. They're damn active. I guess we're getting close to the election. They're trying to gum up the works, as we all know that they would. All right, we better get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Hey, it's Labor Day. Do you have the day off? I don't know. Is this working? I don't consider it work, but it's a calling nonetheless. Alan Pike of Think Progress brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A drug enforcement task force operating along the Gulf of Mexico became a rip-and-run criminal enterprise over a 7-year period, federal prosecutors revealed this week. When jurors convicted the ringleader of the scheme on Wednesday of last week, they also vindicated some long-standing claims leveled by Houston's hip-hop royalty. DEA Special Agent Chad Scott, who now faces years in prison after a jury found him guilty of 7 charges, had for years been accused of corrupt conduct toward Ghetto Boys legend Scarface and the Rap-A-Lot Records label. Court documents in Scott's case suggest his badge-bearing scammers grew bolder and greedier after early successes stealing from drug dealers. Scott eventually decided he'd like to have a free Ford F-150, so he had a Houston-based drug dealer who'd been suborned by the crooked police cell to buy one, then seized it as part of an asset forfeiture. Rather than hand it over to the task force, court documents say he falsified paperwork about the seizure to say he'd picked it up in Louisiana rather than Texas. The change allowed Scott to start driving the $43,000 brand new truck as his work vehicle, rendering it, in effect, his personal chariot, whether on duty or off. Scott was convicted last Wednesday of multiple counts of perjury and related crimes of falsification related to the truck swindle and other rip-and-run scams. His co-conspirators include multiple deputies from sheriff's departments around the New Orleans area who'd scored plum assignments to the federal task force alongside him. And they will now face trial on related charges this year. An indictment alleges a corruption ran from at least 2009 to 2016, but some Houstonians have had their eyes on Scott and his pals for much longer. Scott and another DEA agent named Jack Schumacher led a probe of J. Prince's Rap-A-Lot records starting in the 90s. The label's main prodigies are most famous for their hit, Damn It Feels Good to Be a Gangster. In fact, it was even featured in the movie Office Space. Scarface and other artists on the label have enjoyed prolific and rich careers outside of that hit. Scott and Shoemaker, however, were convinced Rap-A-Lot was a front for a major trafficking network and used their probe to build cases against numerous people associated with the label. Neither J. Prince nor Scarface were charged in the sweep, but Schumacher and Scott sought to portray Prince as the button man behind a murder that was successfully prosecuted around that same time. The man jailed for that crime, Lamar Burks, has maintained his innocence in the killing, which occurred during a dice game in the city's 5th Ward. Well, the rap moguls were not shy about telling the public that they saw in Scott and Schumacher a dirty operation. Years before the current federal investigation says was the beginning of the corrupt activity, Scarface and even named Scott and Shoemaker directly, and 2 songs from his 2000 release, The Last of a Dying Breed. 19 years later, court documents in Scott's case substantiate much of what the Houston rap scene had been saying about the local DEA. Oliver Willis of Share Blue Media brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. And it is Labor Day, all day. The Department of Homeland Security has barred staffers from the House Oversight Committee from conducting visits of detention facilities where migrants are being held. The decision comes after migrants detailed actions and policies that could be considered abusive of detainees, particularly children. Oversight Chair Elijah Cummings sent a letter to acting DHS Secretary Kevin McLennan on Wednesday last week objecting to the action. I am writing to express my deep concern that the DHS decided to block committee staff from conducting visits of 11 detention facilities just days after previous staff inspections revealed potentially serious ongoing problems with the treatment of children and adults in DH custody, Cummings wrote. Well, DHF gave Fox News an exclusive story claiming that visits have been cut off because Oversight Committee staffers were disruptive. Quoting anonymous sources who claim committee staffers interfered with law enforcement operations and were rude. Cummings denied these claims in his letter. Committee staff were not rude, he wrote, and never once refused to abide by instructions from agency officials. Customs and Border Patrol officials made similar anonymous claims about Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in July, telling the conservative Washington Examiner that the Congresswoman screamed at agents in a threatening manner. Really? These macho, steroid-pumped-up, toxic, masculine guys were threatened by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Could it be that maybe she's brown? Is that the reason that she was hulked up in their minds? Ocasio-Cortez wrote in response to the attempted smear, "They confiscated my phone and they were all armed. They're just upset I exposed their inhumane behavior." In his letter, Cummings said the committee was blocked from sites where the Inspector General warned about an immediate risk to the health and safety of DHS agents and officers and to those detained. In one instance, detainees told the committee they were concerned that toddlers and infants were being fed burritos instead of appropriately nutritional food. Infants being fed burritos? A little early for some, I would think. Among other allegations, Cummings said staffers were told young children were held in cold rooms without appropriate clothing, and parents were not given a sufficient number of diapers for their children. You know, the term icebox baby gulag did not come out of a vacuum. Cummings said one detainee reported that a Border Patrol agent told a child who spilled soup that the rest of them would be denied food unless the child drank the soup spilled off the floor. The chairman also pointed out that the Trump administration expects Congress to be satisfied with receiving agency tours of facilities in some cases without the ability to photograph conditions or interview detainees. In June, Mike Pence was given a tour of a detention facility with cameras in tow. Trump later said the footage of the media stunt showed a, quote, clean but crowded facility, end quote, while reporters noted that the area had an overwhelming stench. Trump's policies have led to families being detained in facilities that have been cited by government inspectors for substandard conditions. Now his officials don't want those in the government tasked with oversight to be allowed inside. Needham, also of Share Blue Media, brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Now that Customs and Border Protection wants to take DNA from everyone that crosses the border, well, we know it's both racist and a privacy nightmare. But who cares about constitutional guarantees when the only amendment in the Constitution that matters is the Second Amendment? The Trump team is currently circulating a rule that would allow it to collect DNA from undocumented immigrants at the border. It's a spectacular, unwarranted invasion of privacy. It also discomfortingly evokes the Nazi era and the tracking of Jewish people throughout that time. On Thursday, BuzzFeed reported that they had seen the draft rule, which says that the administration wants to allow Customs and Border Protection to collect DNA from any undocumented immigrant it has in its custody. Oh, you mean even U.S. citizens just because they're brown? A DHS official confirmed that they were working closely with the DOJ on a path forward for DNA collection, meaning that they've been taking the DNA, they just don't know where to put it yet. But they will figure it out. And then they'll be tracking you and me and everybody else because we got to keep those brown people from coming here. Up until now, Customs and Border Protection has been barred from collecting DNA from people who were not facing criminal charges and people facing deportation. The proposed rule gets rid of that barrier. Wow, there's a lot of OLC memos laying about. It's almost as if we have a shadow government. As much as the right wing and Q and all of them talk about the shadow government, it seems to me like they're the ones running it. Or at least that rogue office of the FBI in New York. I think it's the Manhattan office, isn't it? The administration is interested in DNA collection because of its belief that the families who cross the border are fake. comprised of unrelated individuals who are posing as families to gain asylum. Oh, you have a cute little kid. That's not your kid. In fact, we're going to kill it. And they do. This isn't the first time U.S. authorities have relied on genetic testing to regulate immigration. The country did it on a large scale during the Cold War, testing thousands of Chinese immigrants who were claimed to be the children of Chinese-American fathers because the government believed these were paper sons, people lying about their kinship. It was a racist and exclusionary policy back then, too, ignoring that the test had a high rate of error, as well as ignoring that kinship bonds in Chinese culture are not necessarily biological. The policy was also not applied to non-Christian immigrants in the same fashion. Yeah, what happens when you were adopted as a baby? That happens, you know. Oh, well, off to whatever country we decide to send you, where you can die. This also harkens back to the actions of the Nazis during World War II. Then, Germany contracted with U.S.-based IBM, which provided a punch card system to help Nazis organize, systematize, and accelerate Hitler's anti-Jewish program. Wow, IBM had the final solution, too. The Trump team is proposing to build a DNA database of people it has already indicated it finds undesirable. Anybody who's got brown in their genetic makeup or black have to get out. Yellow people, too. Oh, you were brought here as a child from Cambodia to escape the communists who are killing everybody in the killing fields? Too bad. You gotta go back. This is just not another chilling example of how this administration is willing to undermine privacy and human rights in its racist quest to stop immigration from people Trump and that Santa Monica Goebbels Stephen Miller just don't like. All right, that gets us to our break, and which we better do. And we will, when we come back from the break, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Not Blinded. The universality of music is well recognized and figures prominently in arguments that people everywhere are more alike than different. In the new film Blinded by the Light, it's the 16-year-old son of Pakistani immigrants who finds inspiration in the music and lyrics of American rocker Bruce Springsteen. Based on a biographical memoir by journalist Sarfraz Manzoor, the co-writer here, the story picks up in 1988 in Luton, an industrial suburb near London, in the midst of the Thatcher-induced economic meltdown and its resultant social problems. It's a coming-of-age and an acculturation story in which Javed, played by newcomer Vivek Kalra, has to deal with a traditional father, arrogant schoolmates and their unwoke parents, as well as the outright racism of local National Front thugs. When a fellow student turns the poetry-writing Javed onto the boss, he suddenly finds a kindred spirit in the faux downtrodden New Jerseyite, declaring in one scene, "Bruce knows everything I've ever felt." Director Gorinda Chadha has visited the acculturation part of this tale before, in 2002's Bend It Like Beckham, and the feel here is similar, that of a comedy drama, this one not afraid to confront ugly reality, as it does in portraying the National Front's violence and rhetoric, which, as we now know, is confined neither to the UK or the 1980s. Though there's plenty of cliché here, and there seems to be a glut of movies about South Asians acclimating through music, think Yesterday and Bohemian Rhapsody, Blinded by the Light comes across as earnest and insightful, deftly maneuvering from straight-up musical scenes to near docudrama. Add a good cast and the music and visually incorporated lyrics of The Boss, and this one will delight all but the most cynical about pop culture. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Suzanne Bard. Some scientists stick to the lab, but others brave venomous snakes and down power lines. Take Jonathan Pruitt, an evolutionary biologist at McMaster University. During last year's hurricane season, he went to the U.S. Southeast to see how extreme weather affects spiders.
The goal of this experiment was basically to figure out how rare but extreme events might sculpt the traits of animals that we see out there in the wild.
The inherent difficulties in doing this kind of work has meant little research into how disasters can be a driving force behind natural selection.
The only way that I was able to do this was via the assistance of locals who immediately following these storms all get into their trucks and drive around to survey the damage of their houses, but they also bring chainsaws, and so they will be cutting their way through state roads, and I basically just draft right behind what could be a conga line of F-150s with chainsaws and use them to cut a path back to my study sites.
All that to survey the habits of tangleweb spiders, which live in colonies above bodies of water.
And they cooperate in subduing prey together like a tiny spidery pride of lions.
The spiders come in two personality types, docile and aggressive. Aggressive colonies are prone to cannibalism, fight among themselves, and are quick to pounce on their prey. Pruitt found that when aggressive colonies survived a storm, they produced more baby spiders than did their less aggressive counterparts. But in hurricane-free areas, docile colonies had more babies.
So whether or not it's good to be an aggressive society is contingent on whether or not you're going to have a tropical cyclone strike you or not that year.
Pruitt thinks the difference is due to hurricanes lowering the number of insect prey flying around. He says of the aggressive spiders,
I think they are good at capitalizing on the limited number of time-sensitive foraging opportunities they have. So when a prey item hits their web, they run out fast, they grab it, it does not get away. And so under those conditions, we think that's why it pays to be aggressive.
The research is in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. Pruitt says as hurricanes become more common, they could have an outsized impact on the spider's evolutionary trajectory.
But the fact of the matter is we should not think that what we found in these spiders should be unique to them.
Indeed, climate change could have a stormy future in store for all kinds of animal species. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Suzanne Bard.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Hey kids and parents, it's back to school time. As you shop for school supplies and get ready for class, make sure you have emergency plans in place. Did you know that emergency preparedness plays a major role in school life? Throughout the year, schools actively prepare for natural disasters, outbreaks, and other emergency situations. Students and parents need to be aware and learn what to do during an emergency. Every family should build an emergency kit, make a family disaster plan, and be informed about events that could affect their community. Parents, take a few extra steps to help children be prepared. Make sure they know the full name, address, and phone numbers of parents or guardians. In our high-tech world of cell phones, memorizing emergency phone numbers is very important. Include a copy of this information in their backpack. Other items to keep in their backpack include water and non-perishable snacks, a pocket-sized first aid kit, a whistle to alert others for help, and a list of allergies, medical conditions, and medications. Make sure their school and teacher have a copy, too. Be familiar with different routes and ways to travel home, like walking, taking the bus, or riding home with another student who lives nearby. Establish a secret code word with your child and whoever takes them home from school to protect against an unauthorized person picking them up. This list is a great starting point to prepare your student for the upcoming school year. Customize these steps to fit your child's capabilities and needs. Ask school administrators and teachers about emergency preparedness plans so you know what steps they are taking to keep your child safe. Many schools have guidelines on how to shelter in place during natural disasters, how to secure classrooms during an emergency lockdown, and how to teach preparedness curriculum to students. Remember, emergency preparedness is important for everyone. Children who are prepared are more confident during stressful emergency situations. By following preparedness guidelines, parents, children, and school staff can improve their safety and peace of mind. For more information on school emergency preparedness, visit cdc.gov/children/schools. To learn more about disasters and emergency preparedness, follow @CDC Emergency on Twitter or visit emergency.cdc.gov. So, let's get prepared. Have a great school year.
For the most accurate health information, visit www.cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
If you like sugar, the full-page photograph in the recent New York Times Magazine of a typical enormous chain store candy display should warm your heart, but the accompanying headline and story should send shudders up and down your spine. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The article, part of the 1619 Project, is written by Harvard professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad, and the large font text in the page facing the photo says, quote, "The sugar that saturates the American diet has a barbaric history as the white gold that fueled slavery." As Muhammad writes, quote, "Most of these stories of brutality, torture, and premature death have never been told in classroom textbooks or historical museums. They have been refined and whitewashed in the mills and factories of Southern folklore, the Romantic South, the Lost Cause, the popular Moonlight and Magnolias plantation tours so important to Louisiana's agritourism today. Also, as of today, Americans on average consume 75 to 80 pounds of sugar a year. Today, the sugarcane farming business, for the most part, excludes African Americans. Today, the tentacles and remnants of sugar slavery continue. And this story about sugar should appropriately leave a bad taste in your mouth. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1885. White miners in Rock Spring, Wyoming, planned to wipe out the entire town's Chinese community. Chinese immigrants came to the United States looking for work, first in the California gold mines, then as laborers on the Transcontinental Railroad. Later, some worked for the Union Pacific-owned coal mines, including the one in Rock Springs. Union Pacific used racial animosity to divide its labor force. The company quashed the union at Rock Springs and only rehired 50 white miners. The other 150 miners were Chinese. And on this morning, 2 white miners went to the mines and beat 2 Chinese miners, 1 to death. A mob of 150 whites armed with rifles marched into Chinatown. The mob gave Chinese residents an hour to pack up and leave. However, after 30 minutes, some started shooting off their rifles. 1 Chinese miner was killed. The Chinese workers panicked and tried to flee. White rioters robbed, beat, and even killed the Chinese workers that they could catch. In a report to the New York Chinese consulate, Chinese survivors related some of the rioters would let a Chinese go after depriving him of all his gold and silver, while another would be beaten with the butt ends of the weapon before being let go. Some of the rioters would shoot a Chinese dead on the spot. Some stood by, shouting loudly and laughing and clapping their hands. That night, white rioters burned down every building in Chinatown. In all, 28 Chinese workers were killed. President Grover Cleveland sent in federal troops to quell the violence. In the aftermath, the Chinese workers did not want to return to work. Union Pacific did not want to lose its cheap labor force and forced their return to the mines. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. And it's Labor Day. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 62 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of about nearly the same as what we had yesterday, about 88 to 90 degrees or so. And overnight lows should be down in the mid to low 60s. Sunny conditions will prevail throughout the day. Winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. They are out of the southwest, a negligible 1 to 2 miles per hour, affectionately known as light and variable. Will be light and variable tomorrow, and then, light and variable overnight, and then picking up to its usual 5 to 10 miles per hour later on tomorrow morning, where we are expecting pretty much the same temperature, 88 to 90, but under partly cloudy conditions. Very small chance of rain, though the confluence of hot and cold might bring some. We would hope not just the electrical part. We like the rain to put out the results of an electrical hit. It's always nice when that happens. Grass pollen is rated at none. Wow. The air quality index has fallen somewhat and is in the good range at 24 parts per million, but that daytime UV index remains high at 7, though it's lower than the 9 it was in the heat of summer. It's still dangerous, so do take care. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.04 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. And relative humidity is a muggy 84%. Tropical. It is, because it's coming straight from Hawaii. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 70 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 74 degrees and sunny. Rome is 80 degrees with a light rain. Kiev is 85 and fair. Kabul is 82 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 81 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 82 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 54 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 60 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And New York is 75 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this first amuse-bouche at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And why wouldn't they be anonymous? They're reporting on North Korea. You never know when you might be poked with some poison in an airline terminal. You never know. North Korea denied on Sunday yesterday allegations it had obtained $2 billion through cyber attacks on banks and cryptocurrency exchanges and accused the U.S. for spreading rumors. Wow, have we? A UN report seen by Reuters last month said North Korea had used widespread and increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks to steal from banks and cryptocurrency exchanges, amassing $2 billion, which it used to fund weapons of mass destruction programs. The U.S. and other hostile forces are now spreading ill-hearted rumors, North Korea's state-run news agency reported, citing a statement from the spokesperson for the National Coordination Committee of the DPRK for Anti-Money Laundering and Countering and Financing of Terrorism. Wow, that's a long title. Such a fabrication by hostile forces is nothing but a sort of nasty game aimed at tarnishing the image of our republic and finding justification for sanctions and pressure against the DPRK. Of course it is. Washington had made scant progress toward its goal of getting North Korea to give up its nuke weapons program, despite 3 meetings between Donald and Kim Jong-un. They exchanged love letters. I thought everything was hunky-dory. You never know what goes on behind closed doors now, do you? North Korea's vice foreign minister said on Saturday that hopes for talks with Washington were fading and criticized Mike Pompeo's recent comments about North Korea's rogue behavior. Well, Pyongyang has been blamed in recent years for a series of online attacks, mostly on financial networks in the U.S., South Korea, and over a dozen other countries, as experts say. Such cyber activities generate hard currency for the regime. The crux of the allegations against North Korea is its connection to a hacking group called Lazarus that is linked to $81 million heisted at the Bangladesh Central Bank in 2016 and a 2014 attack on Sony's Hollywood studio. We all remember that. Remember all the dirt that came up out of that one? You know, like blackmail.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Lisa Needham of Share Blue Media brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. At every turn, Trump likes to ingratiate himself to Vlad, so it isn't entirely unsurprising that Trump has indicated he may now block military aid to the Ukraine, as part of why Ukraine needs that money is to push back against Russia. Trump has indicated he wants to review whether to send the $250 million in military aid Ukraine is slated to receive. Senior officials have said this is in keeping with Trump's overall desire that foreign aid is given to those countries which pay their fair share. Really now, is that how it's worked before? There's something a bit darker at work here, however. Ukraine receives military aid because the Pentagon has assessed that the separatists in the east of Ukraine are backed and armed by Russia. So Trump's desire to harm Ukraine's efforts in that arena can easily be seen as an attempt to cement his ties with Putin further. It's likely no coincidence that this came up at the same time Trump has been agitating to let Russia back in the G7. Oh, you know, the used to be the G8, but Russia was kicked out for invading the Ukraine. Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper is sounding the alarm too, and at least one Russia official has already applauded Trump's move. Leonid Slutsky, the head of the Russia State Duma Foreign Affairs Committee, praised Trump for doing his due diligence. It isn't like this is an entirely new move for Trump. While campaigning and running for president, he may have participated in altering the platform of the GOP campaign to weaken support for U.S. aid to Ukraine. Now, thanks to Trump's willingness to harm Ukraine in order to cater to Russia, it looks like Manafort and Putin both might see their wishes come true. Just before Christmas as well. Hey, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on. And we're going to meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.